Thank you.
Can you greet him in the
What happened to you this morning?
Didn't make it. I'll see you later.
Yeah, you give me agita. You're not in front of me. I don't daven as
No, he's
well.
in front of you, but not just for the
But-
fear.
It's over you. It's over you.
All right. We gratefully acknowledge the generosity of our many sponsors. A year of learning by the friends of Nina Moinister, Nechama Asna Bas Yitzchak Aron, friends of Stephen Vigder, Simcha Melech, Ben Meir Lev Halevi, friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece, Leah Bracha Bas Rivka, Isaac and Evelyn Blacher in memory of his sister, Chaya Rachel Bas Iser. Month of Learning by Mark Lindner in memory of his mother, Yona Bas Salman Lev. Rabbi Isaac Schmerler and friends of Marilyn Schmerler in memory of Isaac's wife and their friend, Menya Sima Bas Yitzchak Eilert. Gary and Marcia Schrager in memory of his father, David Ben Yosef, and his mother, Freda Bas Hendel. Marcia Federbush in memory of her husband, Uriel Pinchas Ben Rav Shimon. Andrea and David Dolny in memory of her father, Tzvi Herschel Hillel Ben Abraham. A week of learning by Shelley and Oscar Mole in memory of her father, Shlomo Reuven Ben Benyamin. Vicky at Rabinowitz Fish and Larry Fish in memory of her father, Chaim Zusha Ben Shalom Ben Zion, and her mother, Ita Bas Tzvi, and his father, Avram David Ben Shlomo Raphael. Donna Goldstein in memory of her father, Aryeh Yehuda Ben Moshe Shmuel. And a day of learning by Toby and Gary Greenstein or Steen in memory of her father, Yosef Menachem Ben Nacho. And that's it for today. And Shalosh Shudas tomorrow is sponsored by the shul because nobody kicked in any money. So please consider paying for Shalosh Shudas. Okay. So at the bottom of Mem Gimel Amid Beis, we learned the issue of these two ksubas. The first one, it chronologically is 200. The second one is 300. So there was a supposition, perhaps they both are whole and she could get 500. The Gemara comments, but the problem with that supposition is he did not write. In the second one, I'm going to give you 300 in addition to the early 200. So we assume that the second one is separate. We also assume the first one was by Arison, the second by Nisuyin. And we wind up telling the girl you get a choice, or her father. If you want, you can collect the earlier kasuba, which is 200, or if you prefer, you can collect the later kasuba, which is 300. And the only hypothesis I could think of is that the 200 is a sure thing, and maybe the 300 he doesn't have. Otherwise, why would you go for the 2 over the 3? I didn't see anything. It was just my supposition. Top of Mem Dalet. So now we're going on and we're going to say, why can't she simply collect 200 for the first ksuva and then put in a claim for 100 more based on the second ksuva? Hachinami hainatime. Here too, the rationale is the lo gavya. She can't do that. Get 100, 200 from the first and then an additional 100. Because midelo kasav lo asifis loch meya amosayim. because the wording of the second does not include the phrase, I'll give you an extra 100 on top of the 200. So the implication of the second kesuba having the same wording as the first kesuba, except for the larger amount, achule achilte lishibuda kaima. What he intends, if she collects the second, is for her to tear up, to relinquish any claim that the first might imply. Okay, so now the point I had made, she gets her druthers, Omar Mar, this would be Rav Huna making the comment, boy, Bahai Gavia, he can take the first kesuba if she wants of 200. Boy, Mehai Gavia, or she can collect the second kesuba, which is 300, and is at a later date. So the implication of that, Rav Huna, is that both documents have validity, that they are independent of each other. The first is still in effect, and the second is still in effect. So Lema Pliga de Rav Nachman. So do we say that both the concept of Rav Huna, that both kesubas are in effect, is an argument with the statement of Rav Nachman, Domer Rav Nachman, Shtei Shnoras Hayotzin B'Zachar Zeh. Someone is transferring land to another individual, and for one reason or another, the Gemara will suppose some reasons, he drafts two deeds of transfer. One is dated Rosh Chodesh Elul, and the other is dated the 20th of Elul. Okay, so according to Rav Nachman, Shtei Sharas Hayotzin Zeh Bitel Sheni Es Harishon, the existence of the second document, the second deed, nullifies the first document. So going back to Rav Huna, then the girl would only be able to collect the second because the first ksuba is canceled. So there seems to be a conflict between Rav Nachman and Rav Huna.
Is the implication then that she presents the kesuba after the suing?
Well, she presents the second kesuba, which presumably was drafted just prior to the Nisuyin. So it could have been that he dropped dead between the kesuba and, or changed his mind and divorced her, but most likely she's already a Nesua.
She could have presented the first one then after Erison.
And then she would not be able to present the second one anymore.
She could have presented the first one after Erison.
Well, only if he divorced her or died. So then the second one couldn't have happened. It's not Nogeya if the guy's dead. Or if he's what? No, I mean, a man who's dead normally can't write a new ksuba. And a man who divorced his wife normally would not write a new kesuba. He wants to get away with as little as possible. He doesn't want to augment. Now, somebody asked yesterday, why would somebody do this? Why would somebody pay more? So we already learned that the 200 is a minimum, and that there were, as a standard, a Bas Kohen usually got more money. If the father's a rich guy, we would give her more money because we want her to be able to maintain herself in this manner to which she had become accustomed. So the guy could have written a nominal 200 kesuba so that they could complete an erusin. And then he would negotiate with her father how much more and draft the second kesuba accordingly. That's a most likely scenario. So Lav mi itmer Allah didn't when it came to Reb Nachman, it was not unconditional. Omer Rav Papa murder Reb Nachman. Reb Nachman would acknowledge the Eisif Dikla that if the text of the second deed had additional material transferred, for example, I write a deed transferring 5 acres to Rabbi Green. And then Rabbi Green says to me, you know, there's this palm tree right on the border of the property. Why don't you throw that in? So I say, okay. And I write a new deed. I'm giving 5 acres to Rabbi Green plus the palm tree on the perimeter. So now the new kasuba, the Hosefes kasva, that has new material in it. So now Rav Nachman would be moda that new material means that the first deed is canceled because nobody in his right mind would not accept the beautiful palm tree with all those gorgeous dates on it. Okay, so hachinami, similarly, with this, that Reb Nachman might even be murdered with regard to the 2 or 3 in those 2 ksubos, that because of the additional material, it doesn't necessarily cancel the first. But if the wording is identical, except for the date and the names of the witnesses, then the first would be canceled, according to Reb Nachman.
But if he comes along with a deed for the palm tree.
A separate deed for the palm,
deed for the palm tree.
then there is no second deed for the land. If I sell you 5 acres and then I read a second deed transferring the palm tree, then you have 2 separate documents that have no overlap. It's only when the second one says, I'll go, all right, I'll throw in the palm tree on top of the 5 acres.
But one doesn't cancel the other one.
If that is the case,
Right.
if there is a substantial change.
Right.
If the only change is the date or the names of the witnesses, then it would mistam, according to Reb Nachman, cancel the first. According to Reb Huna, not necessarily. Okay, and why? And now the Gemara will be, just as a spoiler alert. The Gemara will go into why someone might write a new deed other than adding the palm tree. Okay, so now, but we've mentioned this price of Reb Nachman, so we're going to quote it. Gufa Omer Reb Nachman, Shtei Sharas Haitzim V'Zeh Chazeh, 2 documents, one after the other. Bitel Sheni Esarishon, the second cancels the first. Reb Papa comments, Moide Reb Nachman, the Oisif Bey Dikla, if it adds the palm tree, that's just an idea. Doesn't have to be a palm tree, of course. Lahaisefes Kasbe, that is added on, and that's why he wrote the second one. It was only to add the palm tree, and it doesn't necessarily cancel. If Kenny finds he is allergic to dates, he can reject the palm tree. Okay, Pshita, all that's obvious. Rishon b'mecher v'sheni b'matana. What if the significant difference is the first says, I'll sell Kenny that plot of land for $10,000, and the second says, no, I'm feeling generous, I'll give it to him. Okay? Liafa, so there is both a plus and a minus to that. Okay, if I give it to him rather than sell it to him, the plus is he doesn't have to pay for it. But we'll see there is a minus. Liafas kaichahu dekosavle. He gives the recipient on the one hand like extra clout. Mishum dina de bar mitzvah. There's a halacha called bar mitzvah that goes like this. The assumption is that owning 10-acre contiguous acres is better than owning 5 contiguous acres. In other words, if you could acquire the property right next door to yours and increase the size of your field That's considered such a good thing that if the owner of the property next door decides to sell and comes up with a buyer who offers an amount, the neighbor has the right, has what we would call in English the right of first refusal. So he has the right to throw out that buyer and claim that land. That halacha is so strong that if it's 5 months later, he can force the neighbor to sell it to him for the price he paid. But that only applies to a sale. If I don't like the gabbai, and I don't want him to have the right to claim the field, I can give it to Kenny. And now the gabbai can't grab it from Kenny. So that gives an extra clout, mishum dina de bar mitzvah. And furthermore, and v'chol shekain rishon b'matana v'sheni b'mecher. What if the first one was a gift and the second one was a sale? That's also a good deal for the buyer, even though he has to come up with the money. The amrina misham dina de balchovu, the cost of Cain. If I give land to Kenny and it has a lien on it, and the bank or the gabbai with his beautiful yellow shirt says owes me money, and he gave this land to Kenny, I'm claiming that land in payment of the debt because the lien went with the land. It's like selling a house with a mortgage on it. The new owner has to pay the mortgage, and the old owner still is mechuyev on the mortgage. Then if Kenny bought it, he can now come back to me and sue me for the money that the gabbai took from him. However, if I gave it to Kenny, the gabbai could come along and take it from Kenny, and Kenny has no recourse. So in a sense, there is a value to having bought it because he can come and claim money from me. Ella ish nehem v'mecher v'shnehem v'matana. If neither deed alters the transaction, they're both money or they're both freebies, Bitel Sheni, and there are no other alterations, Bitel Sheni as Harishon, then the second deed would cancel the first. Is there a question? I guess not. Okay, my timer, what's the rationale that the second cancels the first? Then they give two. Rafman Omer, Amar, Oduye, Oide Le. That the buyer and seller agree there's some flaw in the first deed that makes it invalid. So they redo it to make a valid deed. That's one possibility. That's Rafram's answer. Ravacha Omer, Amar Achule Achle Lishibude. That the buyer agrees to write a later date to weaken his claim against the seller. The seller has a lot of different pieces of property. He also owes a lot of money. So he's liquidating his holdings to pay off his creditors. So if the earlier dated deed, the seller had 5 pieces of land left, then the purchaser of that piece of property can, if there's somebody claims you owe money, he still owes me, never paid me, then he could go and claim one of those other 4 pieces. However, if by the time of the second date, the seller had already disposed of all of those fields, now the buyer doesn't have a field he could go claim on. Okay, so that the Rav Acha's point is that the buyer is being generous and relinquishing his possible claim if it gets taken away from him. So my benaihu, in bottom line, in terms of practicality, what would be differences between these two viewpoints? Ika benaihu, here are some differences. Oruye zahade, if Ruvain and Shimon are witnesses on a document that the buyer and seller later agree is invalid, then Reuven and Shimon may never again be witnesses because they've now testified to an incorrect document. They've sworn falsely, maybe inadvertently, but nonetheless, they've sworn falsely. So in the future, Reuven and Shimon may never be witnesses on any transactions involving the buyer.
That's both of them. What if
Both of them.
What about separately?
No, they're invalid witnesses. So
Permanently?
in other words, theoretically, they should be invalid witnesses, period,
Yeah.
because they swore falsely. But the halacha is, since it was inadvertent, they're only disqualified concerning the buyer. But if the Gabbai decided to buy land from Marty, then Reuven and Shimon could be witnesses. Okay. What? Okay, that's one. V'tashlume pere. Another possible distinction would be if I buy the land, the first deed is dated October 1st, and the second deed is dated December 1st. But in the meantime, I did a harvest. I stole, quote unquote, that wheat. I have to pay the previous owner, who still was the owner because of the altered date. I have to pay him for the fruits, the benefits I've derived from that land. If I bought a toll bridge, I'd have to reimburse the tolls. If I bought a farm, I'd have to reimburse the wheat, etc. That's one. And the other one is letaska, the real estate taxes. If you pay your taxes quarterly, and the new date would mean that the previous owner is responsible for the taxes for that quarter. So those would be three distinctions that would be affected by the differing opinions. So now so we deviated, we talked about two ksubas, so then we deviated to two deeds. Now we're going back to two ksubas, and we were left with what can she collect and when, right? And which document is valid? We left that question, and now we're coming back to it. My havi Allah, the ksuba, what's the bottom line versus the ksuba? Taishma, let's learn what the answer would be. The Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, Mishum, Rav Elazar, Berebbi Shimon. There's a significantly long Messiah. Mono Messiah min ha'erusin. The first kisuba, which would be 100 if she's not a virgin, or 200 if she is a virgin, is written at the time of erusin and is obligatory on the husband if he divorces her or dies from the time of erusin weiter. The Tosefes, no matter when the new kasuba is written, the assumption is that's an inducement to the girl, the extra money, to go through with the nisuyin. And the Tosefes is min ha-nisuyin, is not collectible until after nisuyin. Okay, that's the opinion of Rav Elazar Bereb Shimon. And v'chachamim aimrim, echad zeh v'echad zeh min ha-nisuyin, assuming that a divorce or death did not take place after erusin, whichever Kesuba she decides to go to Besdin with would have to be only after he divorces her or dies after Nisuyin. And if the first Kesuba was before Erison and the second by Nisuyin, then the first would taka be nullified according to the Rabbana. So we have a machlaikes, the hilchasa echad ze v'echad ze min hanisuyin. Neither Kesuba may be collected except after Nisuyin, and she would have a choice of which one she would want to collect. All right. The next Mishnah has some.
Quick question.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
When it says Hilchot Echad Zev Echad Zeh Min HaNisuyin,
means both are valid,
you're saying, suggesting that both are valid, okay?
and unless he's dead, or is no longer her husband, the
Why-
Besdin would not entertain the case until.
Why don't I consider it the fact that both the original amount and the Tosefet are written after the Nisuyin?
Because they wrote a Kesuba by Erison. And Metzias, the first document is dated usually on or about the time of it.
All the Gemara says is Echad Zev Echad
That
Zeh.
both documents, all the Gemara means here, in my opinion, is that both documents are valid, and if there's some rationale for only
So
collecting,
that's what I'm asking. That's
but
is it
both,
documents
but
or is
but
it
we
related
make
to
the
amount?
assumption, if they're alive, that they're both dated by Nisuyin, no matter what the actual date in it is. So they're both valid, and she can not, one can't upslug the other because they're both valid. We ignore the actual date and we say both are applicable from Nisuyin. So they're both valid, and she can collect whichever she wants. All right. Next case. A woman converts to Judaism, period. She happens to have a daughter, period. There are three possibilities vis-a-vis that daughter. Possibility number one is the daughter was both conceived and born prior to her converting and converted with her. Okay, now for this statement, it does not matter whether the girl is under three, is before her third birthday, meaning 3 and a day, and therefore is considered a virgin, or is the conversion takes place when she's 5 years old, any date after 3 and a day prior to 12 and a day, in which case the halakha assumes that she's not a virgin, and even if she could medically demonstrate she is a virgin, doesn't matter. The halacha assumes she's a virgin, not a virgin. So possibility one is the child is born prior to the conversion and the girl converts along with mommy. Possibility two, and the girl is considered a Yasaima because she does not have parents. She's a new entity when she comes out of the mix. Possibility two, the mother becomes pregnant prior to her conversion and tovels and while she's pregnant, and then the child is born after the mother's Jewish. And possibility three is the mother converts, she becomes pregnant, this time we assume from a Jewish man, and she becomes pregnant and gives birth while she's Jewish. Those are the only three options if a convert has a child. Okay? So now we can do the Mishnah. Hageyoresh shenisgaira bita ima. A woman converts and her daughter converts along with her. And again, it doesn't matter if it's under age 3 or over age 3. For this case, it doesn't matter. Vizinsa, now you have to add a whole bunch of words. The little girl becomes engaged. She goes through Erison when she's a Naira. When she's 12, between 12 and a day and 12 and a half. and her husband accuses her while she's a naira of committing an immoral act. Okay. Hare zu bechenek, and she's convicted by Bezdin. She gets put to death, as does any adulteress, but she does not get skila, she gets chenek. She does not get a rock dropped on her, she gets her head chopped off. Okay? And ein lo pesach beis ha'av, if a Jewish girl commits adultery while she's a naira, meaning she's a bas mitzvah, but before she's a baigress or even after she's a baigress, she gets put to death at her father's front door. And it's like symbolically saying this family screwed up because they didn't bring her up properly. And it's an embarrassment to the family because she should not have done an immoral act. But this girl doesn't have a father, because she converted to Judaism. So they can't kill her at her father's house. And the Mishnah brings this to tell us that the absence of a father is not an ikuv. V'lo me'asela. What if the husband accused her falsely? And then there's a trial, he brings Adam Zimmerman or whatever, and the Bezdin validates that she did not commit adultery. Normally, the husband would now have to pay, if it's a child, her father, or if it's her, 100 selah. But here, because she's a convert, she doesn't get the 100 selah. We'll see why in the Gemara. That was one. Hoisya. Horasa shalobi kedusha v'lei dasa b'kedusha. Case 2. The woman became impregnated, presumably by a non-Jew, and then converted while she was pregnant, and the baby was born Jewish because the mother was Jewish, and they went to the mikveh together, but the baby was inside her. So that's case 2. Hare zu b'skila. Now the little girl is a Jewish girl, so the standard punishment of skila would apply. The ein lo pasach beisav, but because the mother was impregnated prior to her becoming Jewish, the little girl has a mother, but she doesn't have a father. So there would not be the requirement of killing her by Tati's house, v'lo me'asela, and if she gets acquitted by the Bezdin, she doesn't get the 100 selah. Horasa v'lei dasa b'kedusha, case 3. The girl is conceived and born after the mother becomes Jewish. Hareho kabas Yisrael v'chol devareho. She's 100% Jewish. She has a Jewish father. So if she commits adultery, she would be put to death by Tati's house. And if she's acquitted, either her father or she, depending on her age at the time of the case, she has to be between 12 and 12 and a half when the crime. But the din could have been after she's a bogeres, in which case she'd get the money, or it would be while she's still a naira and her father would get the money. Okay, so those are the cases of a converted mother. Now we're going to talk about a normal Jewish girl born to a normal Jewish mother. Yesh la'av v'yein lo pesach beis ha'av. What if the father doesn't have a house? He's homeless. Or he's a Jewish slave and he lives in someone else's house, right? Or yesh lo pesach beis ha'av. There is a family home. V'yein la'av, but the father is dead. She doesn't have a father. Hare zu b'skila, she still gets killed if she's guilty. with skila. V'lo nemar Pesach Beis Ha'av ela b'mitzvah. We do not say that the existence or absence of a home or the existence and absence of a father alter the halacha. It's simply that if there is a home and a dad, that they kill her by the family domicile. Okay? Lo harezu skila, and obviously she gets skila. Lo nemer Pesach Beis Ha'av ela mitzvah, that the house or absence of a house or a father or absence of a father doesn't change the halacha. Turn the page. Now, we're going to the second case of the girl who was conceived. Her conception was prior to the mother's conversion, and her birth was after the mother's conversion. And we're going to ask.
They're gonna do skila at the house. Isn't skila where they would drop a big stone off?
I can't. Maybe they drop it off the roof. Maybe the pasuk says they throw rocks at her. So maybe I
It's called stoning.
Skila is first done, the person is put I think 8 arms above the ground.
and dropped
put
right.
four.
That so I mean they build a gallows. I mean I don't know.
Then they throw that.
Yeah, I mean I don't know, but they would work it out, or they would say to the girl, "Do us a favor. We don't know how to do this, so please don't commit adultery." All right. So in any event, the Gemara asks a question: Minahani mili. How do we know what the halacha is with case 2? With the pregnancy prior and the birth post conversion. Amar Resh Lakish to Amar Kra Umesa, and she dies. So the way the pasuk goes is, if the girl commits adultery, the people in the town throw rocks at her, give her skila, and she dies. Since the word skila means that she dies, the extra word mesa, she dies, is a ribui. It's an extra word that if you eliminated it from the pasuk, would not alter the pasuk's meaning one whit. Okay? So according to Reish Lakish, l'rabos harasa shelo b'kedusha, v'leidosa b'kedusha. That extra word misa means that even though she was conceived not Jewish, because she was born when Jewish, she still gets skila, and she doesn't get chenek.
I don't understand all the shyness that you're talking about. I mean, I think like by a shower, a muad, it's so shower yisaka yisakel.
So there will be a limud there,
Yeah.
but we're not doing that pasuk, so I'm not going to answer. Okay, I mean I don't know, but that's not relevant to our Gemara. So
Isn't the same thing written by a Jewish girl? That they
this
throw-
is the pasuk by a Jewish girl.
so-
But the extra word misa, which needn't have been in the pasuk, according to Reish Lakish, is a reboy to cover the girl who started out not Jewish but was born Jewish. So now the Gemara is going to ask, and you could expand your question, Ihachi, if that's the case, Mikla Nami, that the man get Malchus also if he's the liar. The Nilke Umeya Sela Nami Lashale. Let him also have to pay the 100. Because if we switch from Chenek to Skila, why don't we call it a package deal? And all the other aspects of a Jewish girl should apply to this born Jewish youngster. So Amar Kra Umesa, the pasuk says, no, her death penalty is skila. And we can't broaden it to the rest of the package. That's the Gemara's reply to that kasha. Ve'ema l'rabos harasa v'leidasa b'kedusha. So why are you jumping? Why are you dealing with case 2? Why don't we talk about case 3, where the woman converted and then became pregnant and then had a baby? So the Gemara says, that's not a question. What are you talking about? Ha-hi Yisraelis me'al Yisrael. That girl is 100% Jewish, is no different than any other Jewish girl, and the whole package does apply to her. So the Gemara asks, what about case 1? Amos l'ravos harasa v'leidasa shelo b'kedusha. That why don't we say that the word misa means even a girl who herself is a convert would not get chenek, she would get skila. So the pasuk has more words after the word misa. The pasuk goes on to say if she's innocent, 100 selah gets paid, because that's the value of a Jewish virgin. Okay, so the rest of the pasuk says the word be Yisroel, Jewish. My ahani le. So if we would say that even a convert gets skila, then what was the whole point of the rest of the pasuk referring specifically to a born Jewish person? So that's how Reish Lakish learns. Amar Rav Yossi Bar Chanina Hamoitzim Shemra al Hayisoima Potter. He makes a diuk that since the rest of the pasuk says they pay to the father the 100 selah, which is the price of a Jewish virgin, he makes the diuk that if the husband accuses her falsely and she has no father, there can be no payment, so the guy's putter. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "V'nasnu la'av hanaira," he has to pay the father of the newly mature young girl, meaning between 12 and a day and 12 and a half. And that's what the pasuk says. Okay? Prat lezu, that excludes an orphan, she'ein la'av, who has no father. Somebody has a question. What?
Brothers.
We learned a couple of days ago that brothers do not actually inherit the girl or money involving the girl. So it's not part of the father's estate. So the brothers don't inherit it, so they can't collect it. The pasuk is a reboy to include some women, but is a miyut to exclude other women. And that was what this Shakla V'Tarya was all about. All right.
I thought that usually when something is coming to a man, it usually goes to his inheritors.
If it,
like Benot Slavka, didn't they? They said something was due their father, it's due them.
but that's because it's something, it exists, it's mammon. There's a difference between mammon and a kanas. Even though the kanas is a monetary payment, it does not have the halachas of money. It has the halachas of kanas. Else somewhere, I don't remember whether we saw it earlier or we will see it, but there is a discussion that in Eretz Yisroel, where there are smuchim, where there are rabbis who have real smicha, they can apply, we had that before, right? They can apply a kanas. But in Bavel, where they're not smuchim, they cannot apply a kanas. So a bezdin in Israel, in Babylonia, would actually force the accused to go have a trial in Israel so they could oppose the kanas. So that's just one example where mammon is not, and kanas have different halachas. So here too, the potential kanas doesn't exist until the guy is tried and convicted. And when that happens, she had no father, so there's no one to pay. Okay, Mesiv Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Isema Rabbi Yossi bar Zvido. So there's another Yossi, either he's Avin's kid or he's Rav Zvida's kid, that there is another pasuk that says if a man seduces a young woman, he is forced to marry her. If he has no brera, he has no choice, he has to marry her. But if her father absolutely refuses to allow that marriage to take place, then the guy has to pay the father the fine. Now that pasuk has an extra word in it. Ve'emo'en yemo'en aviha. If I translated it, if he absolutely refuses. If he refuses is way the pasuk really means. So that's again a reboy. L'ravos yisoima liknos. So this Rav Yossi challenges Rav Yossi Bar Chanina and says, wait a minute. We have another pasuk that has a reboy. Let us say that reboy is even a yasama can collect the fine. If she's under 12 or and a half, the fine gets put in escrow and she gets given the money when she's mature at 12 and a half. But she still gets it, that she still collects it. Rabbi Yossi Galili. That is the opinion of a fourth Rabbi Yossi Galili, who was a Tana. V'hu ma'isiv la v'hu mifrak la. So whichever Rabbi Yossi it was who brought this up, he answers his own question, that the case is as follows. When the accusation or when the seduction takes place, there is a father. But in the interim between the act and the din, the bezdin, the father dies. So he brings that as the reboy. Baba aleha, he sleeps with her, he seduces her. The achar kach nis yatma, she becomes an orphan between the seduction and the bezdin. So that would he limits the reboy to a yasama who's a yasama by the case, but not by the act. Okay. Rava, somebody had a question? Rava suggests chayiv. If you seduce a 12-year-old, you have to pay the fine. A girl under 12, you have to pay the fine. Now the pasuk uses the word naira, which means 12 to 12 and a half. We had earlier that when the word naira is written without a hey, it includes a katana as well. Problem is this pasuk has the hey. Okay, mamai, how do we know that a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old who's seduced, you have to pay the father or marry her? Besula midiktani ami, because the ami teaches a brisa, besulas Yisroel, the payment of Jewish virgins. Okay? Velo besulas gerim, but it does not imply the daughter, the girl who's a virgin, who's a convert. So even if she converted at under 3 in a day, the fine is not applicable. The amrat b'shlema ki hai gavna b'Yisrael mechayev. If you say, it works out. If you say only a Jewish girl born Jewish, where if the man doesn't marry her, he has to pay a fine. Or if he, as might say, Shemra accuses her of immorality and she is acquitted because he's lying or his witnesses are lying, that they have to pay, that works. That's why it has to say a Jewish virgin to exclude a convert. Ella, But if you start out saying, "He amrat Israel ki hai gavna potter," that if the girl is a yasama, he does not have to pay. Well, she was born as a Jewish virgin. Why is that phrase in the pasuk? Hashta Israel potter v'geirim b'maboile. What do you even have to ask if there are cases where a Jewish girl who's fatherless and there's no fine? So obviously there would be no fine by a non-Jewish girl who becomes Jewish because definitionally she has no father. So what's the point of even asking the question? So now we're going weiter. Omer Reish Lakish, Hamoitze Shemra al Hakatana Potter. Reish Lakish picks up the hey at the end of the word naira, and he says that if the girl is a day before her 12th birthday, the man doesn't have to pay the fine, either for seduction or for Maisei Shemra. Shenemar, V'nasnu la'avi hanaira, because the pasuk says he pays the fine to the father of the naira of the 12-year-old with a. Okay, naira mole dvarakasuv. The pasuk has the word naira written out fully with the hay, and that's Reish Lakish's chiddush. So Maskifla Rav Achavar Abba, Rav Achavar Abba objects to Reish Lakish picking up on the hay and saying that under 12, the guy's off the hook financially. Time dixiv naira over there, the reason that it has a hay at the end of the word naira, that's your rationale, Reish Lakish. Halav hachi, if it had been written chaser without the hay, hava amina filakatana, you would have, you could have then said that even a girl under 12. Haksiv, but the pasuk has, there's yet another pasuk. Im emes hoya hadavar, have la nimtza bisulim lanaira. If the truth comes out and the girl did have some signs of virginity, hotziu es hanaira al pesach beis aviha, that she did not have, signs of virginity. In other words, that she committed adultery. We take her to her father's house. Hotzias and Naira Pesach Habes Aviyah Vesikoluha, and we put her to death by skila. So, how could you possibly punish a girl who's 11 3/4, say, by killing her? She's not a bas mitzvah yet. A bas mitzvah is a girl who's 12 in a day. So how could you, this pasuk that talks about this young woman being punished with a death penalty, it has to put the hay, because you could not punish a girl under 12. She's not a bas mitzvah. She cannot commit a sin definitionally, no matter what she does. So in this case, the hay is necessary for the meaning of the pasuk itself, and you can't learn from the hay. Ella kanai. So all that Reish Lakish is doing when he brings up this issue of the hay in this pasuk is to repeat what we learned earlier. Ho kol makom shenem naira. Whenever the word naira is written without the hay. Filu ketana mashma. It also includes a younger child. Okay. Next case. Tane Shila, man named Sheila, teaches a brisa. Shalom midas benaira. Shalosh midas benaira. There are 3 specific ways you might kill a naira, a 12-year-old who commits a sin. Boile Aiden Bebas Chamiya, if she commits adultery while she's already in her father-in-law's house. In other words, she's already moved in with her husband. Shezinsa Bebeis Aviha. If witnesses came after Nisuyin and she's already moved in with the father-in-law and she commits adultery,
Zinsa Bavesa Via is not with the father.
In the house.
No,
That's in her own house.
that's case one. Okay,
No,
Bob
no,
Adam
that's
Bebas
case two.
Chamiya, that there were
Bavesa
witnesses
Via is
that
the
she
first.
did it in her father's house.
That's
That's
the first
case one.
Second case.
Sheninsa Bebes Aviha, the second case with a different penalty is if she commits the adultery while she's only in Arusa and she
Okay,
still
that's the
lives with
second
Tati. And then we would have to turn the page. In both of those cases, cycling also al Pesach Beis Aviyah, in both of those cases, whether or not she's an Erusa or a Nesuya, she gets stoned by Tati's house to Loimar as if to announce to the world, Ra'o Gidulim Shigidaltem. See, this is the kind of a child that was brought up in that house. And then the Gemara will tomorrow give us the next case, the third case. Boilo Adim Bebeis Avia, Shizinsa Bebeis Avia. If the witnesses come while she lives with her father and she commits adultery while she still lives with her father, cycling also a Pesach Shar Ha'ir. In that case, she gets killed by the normal death place that everybody else gets killed at. And Sorcha Lebasoif Bigra, if the crime was committed when between 12 and a day and 12 and a half, but don't actually get to Bezdin until she's older than 12 and a half and is considered a mature woman, then Tidon Bechenek, then the punishment is not skila, it is chenek, it is strangulation.
Mordecai, you did a great job, man. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Okay,
How's your wife?
Baruch Hashem.
Thank God. How's everybody? Do you think you can take him home? Guys, you know?
I don't have my car.
Oh, okay. Are you walking home? I'll walk home with you. That was good.
Thank you.
Rabbi. I'm a little bit tired today, but I did get your phone call. I'll call you when I feel a little bit better. Thanks for your kindness, by the way, Rabbi. And I'll see you in school tonight for Friday night. Good Shabbos, Rabbi. I guess I'll see you in shul too, huh? Friday night?
Yeah.
Friday night, you come to shul every Friday.
Oh, you have
Well, otherwise your buddy there wouldn't be able to participate.